Today we are walking through Scaling Self-Play with Self-Guidance, a paper about making language model self-play keep improving instead of stalling out.
Start with the big picture. What kind of self-play is the paper trying to scale?
The setting is formal theorem proving in Lean 4. A solver tries to prove hard target theorems, while a conjecturer writes related practice theorems that might help the solver learn. In principle, this is attractive because the system can make more training problems for itself. The paper asks whether that loop can keep scaling when training runs for a long time.
If the conjecturer can keep making practice theorems, why would earlier self-play methods plateau?
The failure mode is reward hacking. Over long runs, the conjecturer can learn to make statements that look hard to the reward function, but are artificially complex and do not teach the solver useful steps toward the target. Self-guided self-play, or SGS, adds a third role called the guide. The guide scores each synthetic theorem for relevance to an unsolved target, reasonable complexity, and low redundancy.
So the guide is not solving the theorem.
Exactly. The guide is a quality control signal for the problem maker. It tries to keep the generated theorem on the path toward the unsolved target, rather than letting it drift into messy tricks. This diagram shows the intended behavior. The synthetic problems act like stepping stones, expanding the region of problems the solver can handle and steering that expansion towards still unsolved targets.
In the left side, the useful synthetic problems are the ones between what the solver already knows and the unsolved target, right?
Yes, a random or overcomplicated theorem may be difficult, but it does not from a curriculum. SGS rewards synthetic theorems that are close enough to the target to matter and simple enough to be useful training. The paper measures long-run progress with a scaling curve for cumulative solve rate. Here, cumulative solve rate means the fraction of target theorems solved at least once after a compute budget C.
What does that curve tell us beyond the score at one checkpoint?
It separates the starting solve rate, the eventual ceiling, and how quickly performance approaches that ceiling. The key quantity is A, the estimated asymptotic cumulative solve rate. The guide reward is also explicit. A generated theorem gets credit for being relevant, but it is penalized for unnecessary complexity and redundancy.
So high relevance alone is not enough if the generated theorem becomes bloated?
Right. The equation is introduced because the conjecturer needs a reward that does not simply chase difficulty. It should prefer a theorem that is relevant, concise, and not just a restatement of existing material. The guide ablation makes that concrete. Without the guide, generated theorem conclusions with disjunctions rise to over 80%, and conclusion length grows sharply.
The no-guide line shoots upward, while the SGS line stays near the dataset baseline. Is that the collapse the paper is warning about?
Yes. The no-guide conjecturer finds a loophole produce long statements with many alternatives. They look complex, but they stop acting like clean practice steps. SGS keeps the generated problems much closer to normal theorem statements. During SGS training, the solver's passed on target statements rises steadily. At the same time, the guide reward stays high and the solve rate reward increases, which means the synthetic problems remain useful as the solver improves.
That suggests the conjecturer is not just making more data, it is making data the solver can grow into.
That is the paper's interpretation. The guide keeps the generated theorems relevant, and the solver's rising target performance shows that those stepping stones translate into more solved target theorems. The paper also checks ordinary reinforcement learning baselines. REINF or CU1/2 is the strongest baseline here, reaching about 60% cumulative solve rate, while CISPO is lower and suffers from entropy collapse.
What does entropy collapse mean for this self-play loop?
It means the solver's outputs become too predictable. Then the conjecturer receives a weak learning signal, because generated problems tend to look easily or not solved at all. Now compare SGS against the best A or L baseline. The fitted long-run ceiling is about 67.1% for SGS and about 60.3% for the A or L baseline.
So the result is not only a better early checkpoint.
Yes, the authors report that SGS surpasses the A or L baseline's asymptotic solve rate in fewer than 80 rounds of self-play, and the gap grows with more generations. A striking comparison is model size. With SGS, a 7 billion parameter DeepSeek Prover V2 model exceeds the PASET for performance of the 671 billion parameter version after enough self-play.
That comparison is about training dynamics, not a claim that small models are always better.
Correct. The evidence says that guided self-play can convert a fixed base model and the long compute budget into more solved lean for theorems than ordinary sampling from a much larger model in this benchmark setup.
What are the main limits of the evidence?
The experiments mainly scale compute while holding model size fixed. The paper also focuses on one formal theorem proving setting, so broader generalization across model sizes and domains remains open. The practical lesson is that self-play needs quality control. Useful synthetic data must be tied to unsolved targets, not merely hard, long, or strange.
So the core claim is that the guide prevents the problem maker from drifting away from useful practice.
Exactly. SGS turns the language model into a solver, a conjecturer, and a guide. And the guide is what keeps the self-play curriculum from collapsing into useless complexity. That wraps up this paper walkthrough.